Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Alex Vatanka, Director of the Iran Program here at the Middle East Institute in Washington, D.C., and I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's second panel on the issue of tensions in the Red Sea and the relationship between the Houthi movement in Yemen and the Islamist regime in Tehran. The previous panel focused on the Red Sea strategy of the Houthi movement and American policies and responses. If you missed it, because it was wonderful panel discussion, and prior to that, we had the important remarks of Ambassador Tim Lindeking. And if you missed that as well, you can watch these on the Middle East Institute's YouTube channel. So please make sure to do that. This panel will focus on the actors that are helping or enabling the Yemeni movement of the Houthis to project power, both in terms of its military capabilities, but also in shaping its ideological worldview. Since Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon are arguably the two most important partners of the Houthis, this panel will discuss three broad questions. What are Tehran and Hezbollah's policy aims in supporting the Houthi movement? Are we at a point where we can argue that the Houthis are a full due-paying member of the axis of resistance? In other words, how much control does Tehran have over the Houthi actions? And what can the US and regional governments do to respond to this Houthi agenda? MEI is delighted to welcome three outstanding experts for a conversation around these questions. In the interest of time, I will introduce them by name and affiliation only, and in the order they will speak today. But you can see their full bios on the pages of for this event on the Middle East Institute's website. So first we have Behnam Ben Taleblu, a research fellow at the Foundation of Defense of Democracies in Washington, D.C., although he is joining us from London for this event. Next, we have Fari Al-Muslimi, a research fellow at Chatham House in London as well. Last but not least, we have Sharia Baradust, an analyst with focus on Iran's proxy war strategy, who is presently completing her PhD studies at Virginia Tech. I encourage everyone to submit your questions. Please use Zoom's Q&A feature. I'll be looking at all of your questions and will include as many as I can into our conversation. So as I said, Behnam, we'll start with you. I don't know if you had a chance to listen into the previous panel discussion, which was fabulous, rich in detail, both in terms of Yemeni domestic realities and what's going on a regional level. But one of the things that, as an Iran watcher, I'm hardly a Yemen specialist, but as somebody who spends all his day looking at what's going on in Iran and in terms of Iranian regional policies, as you do, I am struck by the level of support Iran has provided to the Houthis when it comes to their missiles and drones and military capabilities. I see far less Iranian soft power among the Houthis. I don't see the ideological component to be that prominent. And we just heard in the previous panel, the Houthis have their own supreme leader. So they won't be looking at Ali Khamenei as their supreme leader, unlike, say, the Hezbollah organization in Lebanon that does see Ali Khamenei as their spiritual leader. So with that said, take us to the sort of big picture in terms of the history around Iranian military transfers to the Houthis, how it began, where we're at right now. And I know I'm just going to give you 3 or 4 minutes, but if you could just give us a nice summary, that would be fantastic to start us off.
Well, thank you very much, Alex. It's an absolute pleasure to see you again. And my distinguished co-panelists, it's a pleasure to share the stage with you, however, virtually here. I'll try to keep my comments brief about the material transfers and the evolving nature of the Islamic Republic of Iran Houthi relationship. But let me, put my cards on the table here. I do believe the Houthis are the newest member of what Iran has called, really since the mid to late Arab Spring period, the axis of resistance. This is the name the Islamic Republic gives itself to the constellation of proxy and partner and terror and militia forces that in some cases, like Lebanese Hezbollah and the Badr Corps in Iraq, it has created using local conditions. And in the cases of, Hamas in the Gaza Strip and the Houthis in Yemen, they were alive and well, and the Islamic Republic co-opted it particularly in the case of the latter, the co-opting, which the Houthis fall into, one of the ways the Islamic Republic not necessarily exerts control, but influences and wins support and gets the Houthis to make ideational changes, to sing from the same sheet of music, you could will, to pick targets that would be targets of interest for the Islamic Republic, and to turn a partner into a proxy, to get a local actor to carry out a foreign interest, is through things like sustained material support. We saw little inklings of this in the, I think, 2012 flare-up between the Saudis and the Houthis. Some may recall there was evidence of shoulder-launched missiles that people could trace back to Iran, but that was still sparse. And when you looked at Yemen in the past, Yemen was divided during the Cold War. It was the Arab world's poorest country. Saleh, former Yemeni President Ali Abdullah Saleh, had a pretty vast arsenal of long-range strike capabilities anyway. He had liquid propellant Scuds. He had single-stage solid propellant short-range ballistic missiles that were Tachkas, for example. Those still exist in the Houthis' arsenals, which were grafted right on top of this. But suffice to say, starting with the Houthi takeover of Yemen, the overrunning of Sana'a in late 2014, early 2015, you begin to see a steady evolution in the long-range strike capabilities of the Houthis to include newer short-range ballistic missiles. And here we're using the US government threshold for that, which is under 1,000 kilometers, between 300 and 1,000 kilometers. This was essentially the stuff that in 2017, 2018, 2019, you saw the Houthis use to strike targets like Yanbu and Mecca and even Riyadh. And so this was about 700 to 900 kilometers away from Houthi territory. So a real revolution in the reach, the ability to use ballistic missiles as a terror weapon, much like Saddam Hussein used in the Iran-Iraq War, the conflict that spurred Iran's interest in missiles. More broadly, you saw evidence of a move towards precision strike capabilities, turning select rockets into missiles. You saw evidence of the Houthis being able to take surface to surface or air to air and make surface to surface missiles with them. You've seen other countries around the world that are particularly war zone entities around the world in war zones be able to innovate on the battlefield. You saw that with Houthi drones. You saw the Houthis absorb the arsenal of the government that they overran, the military arsenal of Ali Abdullah Saleh, so much so that you had innovations in drone technology, even before it was revealed, for instance, that Iran had the Shahed class of drones, the Delta Wing class of drones. You saw very, very, very early copies of that with the Houthis in mid-spring, summer 2019, even before the famous Iran attack on Aramco, which likely used, I think, Shahed 131 drones, those Delta Wing one-way suicide drones. And for me, as someone who focuses on missiles in particular, it wasn't just precision strike. It wasn't just, Iran's modified Qiyam 2 missiles. It was actually, to be 1,000% honest with you, the fact that in August 2019, for the first time ever, a member of Iran's axis of resistance, the Houthis, fired a medium-range ballistic missile. No other member of Iran's axis of resistance has medium-range ballistic missiles that can fly over 1,000 kilometers. The Houthis in August 2019 once tried to strike Dammam in eastern Saudi Arabia. That missile was called the Burkan 3. Its origins were debated. Then fast forward to January, February 2022, that missile was rebranded as the Zulfiqar and fired at U.S. bases in the UAE. Fortunately, these were all intercepted. But fast forward to September 2022, and we saw for the first time ever a reverse instance of proxy patron missile proliferation. So a missile that Iran had created specifically for the Houthis did not publicly unveil, that the Houthis publicly unveiled, that the Houthis used, once it was proven, ended up going back to the patron. And Yemen is really the only place we have ever seen this in the entire battlefield of the Middle East. And it's really the only place where anti-ship ballistic missiles by a proxy are also being used. So it's not just the cruise missiles, that the anti-ship cruise missiles that the Houthis are using to harass these vessels. They have missiles that fly high and fast with a different trajectory, with an electro-optical seeker that Iran has helped to give them, and that is now being used to harass shipping in the Red Sea, Bab el-Mandeb, and Gulf of Aden.
And very quickly, in terms of supplying the Houthis, I mean, there are so many different naval coalitions in the Red Sea, in the Arabian Sea, in the Persian Gulf, and some of them are as old as 20 years old. I mean, how does that logistically work, and why is the interception has been as clearly as effective as some in the West and Washington wish to see?
In one instance, it's a numbers game. So we saw, for instance, 2018, 2019, Iran cut up larger missiles and the Houthis be able to weld them together in the field. Some of these benefit from not docking into Yemen, which at that time was under really, you could say, a full embargo, but would go into Oman and then be moved over eastern Yemen in what it was essentially Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula territory. So either there was some drama with the Omanis or Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula seemed to permit this land trade from east to west at the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula. That's one. Two is that, of course, a lot of these things are put onto smaller dhows or smaller shipping containers, and they are disguised. Ultimately, there's also a numbers game at play here as well. When you have an adversary that has a high level of resolve, this is costly stuff to try to detect and intercept and continuously swat away. And when you move to the other side of Yemen, so away from Iran and the Persian Gulf and towards Yemen's west, you will notice that the small arms trafficking routes also mirror the drug trafficking routes, also mirror the human trafficking routes. And these are things that unfortunately persist as well, that has been able to provide selective cover for this arms trade.
Thank you. Behnam, on that point, my colleagues at Middle East Institute, led by former commander of Central Command, General Votel, they just issued a memo to President Biden on some of the things the United States could do to prevent the flow of weapons to the Houthis, which might be worth folks picking up and having a look at. It's on the website of the Middle East Institute. I'll come back to you, Behnam. Thank you for those remarks. Shukriya, to you. Behnam says that he believes the Houthis are a member of the Axis of Resistance. There were some questions about that among the experts we heard in the previous panel. I'm certainly one who doesn't think that the Houthis jump every time the generals in the Revolutionary Guards tell them to jump. I'm not sure if that is what Behnam said either, but the question I'm having for you is, turning a partner, again, to use Behnam's words, turning a partner into a proxy. Where is Iran today? Some 10 years after the Houthis took over most of Yemen. Where are they today? Are they turning the Houthis from a partner of convenience to a proxy? And what is Iran fundamentally after in terms of cultivating ties with the Houthi movement, the way you've seen it evolve over the years?
Hi all, and thank you, Alex. Thank you for inviting me and putting together this interesting and timely panel. Following what Behnam said, why Houthi has that kind of support from Iran when it's going to talking about the missiles, first time that kind of range of missile being fired by Houthis, it tells you why Houthi is so important for Iran. I'm talking about how Houthis become the main actor for Iran to using for achieving the goals that from the first day, 1979, Iran's trying to achieve. The first thing, like when you review the evaluation of the Houthis and Iran relation, you will see that this relation been deepened after Arab uprising, after 2011, and get stronger after 2015, when Saudis-led coalition started striking against the Houthis. So the Houthis provide an opportunity, a crucial and significant opportunity for Iran to increase, to bolster its influence on the region that they dominate by Iran's competitor, rival, like Saudi Arabia. But this extension of influence is not just talking about the Saudi. So the Houthis allow Iran to have a more influence on global stage through controlling over Red Sea, over Bab el-Mandeb, because when you be talking about the Red Sea, we're talking about the trade way between the Asia and Europe. So Iran controlling that part, Iran can be recognized on global stage and playing the power there. So that's one of the case how Iran's controlling and impacting global economy and security of the maritime. But secondly, you have to see in context of Iranian military doctrine, we're calling forward defense, which this doctrine talking about how Islamic regimes trying the best to avoid any war in Iran border or inside Iran soil. And by starting or opening in front of the Red Sea, they getting away from Hormuz Strait. If any tension or any war start there, you can see in the statement of Khamenei when he say, if we start war in the Persian Gulf, it means we're starting war in our house. But now we are in the war far from our house, and we are in the Oman Sea. So you see, this is in the concept of the Iran military doctrine too. And the third point, through Houthis, Iran can challenge U.S. power too. U.S. as a superpower responsible for fulfill the duty to secure this main waterway. And now we see that they are unable to secure that waterway, and even starting this strike by US-led coalition and the UK's help with the Houthis, they're not able to control this part. So you can see how, when I say they're now achieving the goal that from first day Khomeini talked about, the war against imperialism in America. So now they're challenging the US power in the Red Sea. And the other point is about opening another front against Israel. We know the Houthis stand against Israel, and the Americas now increasing, but it was already exist among Houthis and Yemenis support for the Palestinians. And even when you go back to read the article being published in 1979, it's talking about how after Iran Islamic regime arrived to the power, the coalition between the Shia militia group and Palestinian group can put the Red Sea under danger. Now, after 4 decades, we see how the writer that time were correct, and now we see that danger on the Red Sea and how energy sources been under threat and attack of Iran-backed militia group. And when you see, and another most important point, when we're talking about the new front against Israel, Iran's true Houthis can put pressure on Israel. What right now we see in the Israel's economy and Israel's shape and economy is under pressure of Iran. And another point is a part of the Iran transferring weapons and military equipment to the Palestinian resistance group. So Houthi, as one of the main important of this axis of resistance, is helping Iran not just for the ideological way, but all the goal Iran had since 1982, working in the Lebanon and Syria, and now after post Saddam's Iraq with the Hashd Sha'bi, Houthis giving the Iran much better achievement and more bigger comprehensive goal after they joined this axis of resistance.
Shakriya, I'll ask the question about Iran's ideological ability to shape the Houthis of Faria in a minute, but let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. You very correctly described what Iran does in the region as part of this forward defense model. Basically, you're better off fighting your enemies outside of Iranian territory in places like Syria and so forth, perhaps in Yemen, then fighting them inside of Iran. And then for a long time, that was something Iran could do. It could occupy the space of deniability, as Iran does right now. Whenever the Houthis are firing missiles, Iranian Foreign Minister Hossein Amir-Abdollahian is out saying nothing to do with us. But increasingly, that's becoming a difficult position for Iran to keep, because the rest of the world is simply not buying that, or at least decided not to ignore the fact that Iran is, or the Islamic Republic is, the mothership. As someone like your good self who spent so much time listening to that Iranian debate in Iran, do you think the idea of forward defense becoming more of a nuisance, more costly than it's worth? Do you think that's picking up? I know it's not true for Khamenei and the top echelons of the Revolutionary Guards, but there is more pressure perhaps in Iran in terms of the blowback from what Iran is doing in the region if it gets the Western countries to decide to punish Iran.
You're right, because we know Iran's, after the Iraq-Iran war, 1988, they start working in the gray zone strategy to stay away from any war that putting Iran in the confront with any enemy. So that's the reason this gray zone become a comfortable zone for Iran to attack the U.S. military bases in Iraq, to act against the Saudis, UAEs, and all these attacks we see from the Iran proxy groups. Iran never take a responsibility or been in charge for that kind of attack in the region, in disability in the region, unstable region. We see the result of this proxy group. But what we can see right now is Iran cannot work in this gray zone anymore. The reason is because this attack is not only in the regional government's problem anymore. This is coming to international stage. When we see how Iran's Houthis attack on Red Sea has become a problem for international economy, for the oil resources for the European energy problems. Now you can see that's why US and UK and other power like Netherlands, they come and joining the forces to stop Houthis. It's not only Saudi's problem or UAE when they blame and they criticize US standing away from supporting them or protecting them. That's the one reason why Iran cannot stay in that gray zone, and Iran will be in charge for that reason, that act. And another point is because Iran is the only country in the region supporting these proxy groups. When we're talking about the Houthis just been recognized, Houthis government been recognized in Tehran, not the other part of the Middle East or the world. And the source of the missile weapon going by Tehran to these militia groups, showing who is behind all these attacks. That's the reason I think it's real difficult for Tehran to stay away from the consequences of these attacks.
Thank you so much. Faria, I wanted to ask you if you wanted to react, because I know you heard the last conversation, the last panel, and as we said, there was so much rich material to work with. Was there anything that jumped at you that you'd like to sort of comment on? But one thing I can tell you that I found interesting, which I would love to hear your thoughts on, is I think it was Ibrahim Jalal who said that, look, when we're talking about what motivates the Houthis, you know, the ideological part does not override the operational benefits of what the Houthis are getting out of acting the way they are in the Red Sea. And I think, again, I asked that question because when we're talking about ideological motivations behind Houthi actions, we often look at Iran. But if ideological motivations are not the key, then I guess Iran is not the actor to look at to some of the policy solutions that policymakers might be looking for. But anyway, your reactions, please.
No, we might be in the same room, just a different window. So it might still be ideological motivations. It just doesn't have to be necessarily Iran's ideological motivations. They can be the same, they can be slightly different, they can be worse, they can be slightly better, but it's still an ideological. And I think it's important to recognize that. And maybe obviously, as you mentioned, it's extremely hard to add after an extremely intelligent panel that already focused on Yemen. But probably the four main aspects I would add, or the three, is if I think of the Houthi-Iran relationships in matter of social and political, in matter of economic, and in matter of military, I think this has changed with time, sometimes more, sometimes less. I think at the beginning, Iran's support for the Houthis was purely media and political and social in that regard. That was between the third and the fourth war. And I think somehow that changed. Most of the time, it was giving them only social and political support. But when you speak to the Iranians about the Houthis until 2 years ago, their main response is, the Houthis, how do you spell that? So it was their main ally, but also their biggest deniability. And then that political social relationship changed into a slightly different, which is slightly different from Iran, more important, as some people are suggesting, more public, more visible. But it also changed in a slightly different way from the Houthis' end. As you notice in the news, a few days ago, the UN envoy visited Tehran. Previously, in the past, previous envoys visited Tehran. Most of the time, they are talking about trying to talk to Tehran to have the Houthis behave. Usually, the Saudis, the Yemeni government, was very welcoming of these trips of UN envoys to Tehran. Specifically recently, the one who's upset the most about these trips is actually the Houthis, saying, no, 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 if you want to talk politics and social, you come to us, you don't go to Tehran. So even that social political deniability somehow switched from the Iranians to the Houthis now. And because also they do feel that after 18 years, 18 months, 18 weeks, 18 whatever, they can walk out of the house of the axis of resistance. So that social political relationship have changed. Sometimes more, but it was more deniable, sometimes less, but it's more deniable from the other side. And I think that's the current where we are. Militarily speaking, at the beginning, there wasn't much support, actually. throughout the years, specifically post-2015, that in fact increased. We know for sure in 2015, as Benham was saying, the Houthis didn't have drones, they didn't have more complicated missiles, but we know for sure today they have maritime capabilities. We know very little of what they have actually, very little, and I insist on that point. They have drones, they have rockets that reach Israel. So somehow that's actually much more evolving, and that evolved a lot because of Iran help. But by now, the Houthis are on their feet by themselves. So I actually believe that the military necessity by today is much less than it was 1 year ago, in fact. And I think that way, they actually, again, it was on the peak. If you think of things as curves, it can go up, it can go less, it can go more. You know, when it's less or more, it doesn't make it any less important, but that's just the curve it went through. So I think, and that's again, the military aspect of it. If you think of the economic, and that's the third aspect I would speak about. There was very little at the beginning. The Iranians, contrary to the Saudis, they are very, very stingy. They would send actually the Houthis honey, and they would flood the Yemeni market, literally as they ruined the Iraqi market with watermelons. And somehow with the country, what they have, and they say, sell this honey, sell this bad oil, and then make the money you need in a local market. So somehow you're asking someone to do your recycle and you're saying, keep the change. But anyways, it worked. And at one point, it was very useful for the Houthis in a lot of ways. And they did that via Dubai. They did that via Oman. They did that sometimes via Saudi Arabia. They did it via Malaysia. They did it via Turkey. They did it via many countries across the region. And the same rule applied to the Iranian money is the same one that applies to the Russian money. As long as you can close your eyes, you can let it go. It doesn't matter how a close ally you are to the US. And that was the same rule that worked. So that was necessary for many years, obviously in a different frameworks. But by now, the Houthis have their own dynasty of financial market. So similar to the military in a way, I think it was very important at one point. It was very silly, very little, and sometimes harmful, but it was the only flow. But at one point by now, again, similarly, the Houthis make a lot of taxation. They have their internal economic empire inside Yemen. And bottom line to say is they are no more economically, if they were very little dependent on Iran in the past economically, they are no more at all in any ways. And then you come into the fourth part, which is obviously religion. And that's when you think about it, of course, the Houthis and the Iranians do share the same Shiite sect of Islam, but you do have to think about it as a British versus American driving. They do drive on the right, you know, while Iranians do drive in the left, ideologically speaking. So while they are the same car, it's the same, you know, Shiite sect, they do have a different rules of the law, and they do have, again, I insist, a different wheel of a driving. And then sometimes they have, again, very different rules of U-turn and how you deal with the traffic lights and what costs you have for different problems you make. But I think that is also the other aspect that no one notices, that most of the time Iran is trying to switch the Houthis from a right driving wheel into a left one also. And I think that's even another proxy between the Houthis and the Iranians themselves, or between different sects within the Houthis, that, or different, not sects, different wings or groups within the Houthis. All of that is to say is neither the Americans nor anyone have a very good or clear choices when it comes into what's happening with the Houthis and Iran.
Thank you. I know, Behnam, you have a comment, but let me just come, because you get the next question anyway, so you can take that. Let me just have a quick follow-up for Faria. I've only been to Yemen, I think once, and that was in 2009. I certainly didn't see any signs of any Iranian in 2009, clearly not much Iranian influence. But I'm wondering today, after the Houthi takeover and the rest of it. When you look at photos and imagery coming out of Yemen, because you mentioned the role of media was the initial thing that the Islamic Republic did for the Houthis. They didn't used to describe the Houthis as Shias. They do today. And it's quite amazing how fast, around a 10-year period, somebody can be converted massively. I mean, we don't want to get into this sort of discussion about, the theological differences or commonalities between the Zaydis and the 12 Jafariya Muslims that rule in Iran. But have you seen, in terms of Islamic Republic, much of a serious effort to bring Ali Khamenei into the discussions as the key leader, as the imam? I mean, I see photos of Hassan Nasrallah in Houthi parades. I don't see ever pictures of Ali Khamenei. Am I missing something?
No, you're not. And I bet you the same guys who are carrying, today Qasem Soleimani's photos at one point carried Jamal Nasser's photos, at one point carried Mark's photos. It's a big part of how politics moves within a country like Yemen. At one point, they probably carried Bouazizi's, and I'm not worried of that over much. But what you have seen is more of days, not figures, that were unusual to even Zaydi Yemeni Islam, like the day of land, Jerusalem. It's a very pure Iranian. The day of Ashura, it was not a Yemeni Zaydi sect. So you do have, and I think that goes both ways again. Iran trying to really have its own less Yemeni version of the Houthis. I insist on that point because a lot of people say there is only one type of Iran, one type of Houthis, and that's the Iran Houthis. I think they're wrong, and I think they most probably have not spoken to a Houthi the last 9 years, because you have to really spend time differentiate between that. And then there is the other Houthis that Iran is trying to make. And I think that they're also trying to report back to Iran in a way. So you do have that, and you have to think of that. I think you have to save Yemen from the Iran, and I think you have to save the Houthis from Iran. And obviously there is a lot of other things that are not possible anymore. But I do think that it is not as things looks like. And I think, in fact, right now, funny enough, when you speak to the Houthis, they find Hezbollah, they find the Iranians not radical enough about Palestine. They find them backward, they find them betrayals, they find them actually their proxies. I really think like there is a lot of misillusion about how the Houthis thinks. And again, in their way, they really don't think, again, even Hezbollah is decent enough in this last crisis. And we have to be aware of that, because it does help how to correctly think of how this group thinks or doesn't think most of the time.
Thank you. Behnam, you wanted to react to something Faria said on the military front, and then I have a question for you.
Sure, I'll keep it very brief. Actually, this is using a disagreement to get to an agreement. The point about self-sufficiency and dependency, I actually agree, but worse than that, I think the Islamic Republic actually agrees too. When you look at this Axis network, sometimes the debate in Washington, I know I'm not in Washington at the moment, but sometimes the debate in Washington is very monadic. On the government side, and then politically often on the right, they think patron, proxy, I jump, you say how high. Then on the academic community side, and politically largely but not exclusively the left, they don't see patron, proxy, they see principal agent. And they think, okay, local actor autonomy, they control everything. And both of these have a kernel of truth, but they're largely extremes. And I feel like the answer with every different proxy, in every different war zone, in every different personal versus institutional versus military relationship is much more fluid and much more different. And if Tehran, I think, seldom gets on the phone. If a local actor wants to do something, I don't think they often need to ask permission. Iran's entire MO is to co-opt someone who is shooting at someone that you want to shoot at and merely empower them to continue shooting. And if there are variations among the someone, like you're talking about the shades of the Houthis, is to have conflict be a homogenizing, flattening factor. And it's exactly in this way that Iran was not upset at all that Lebanese Hezbollah, once they saw Iran under sanctions starting 2005, 6, 7, moved into the narco trafficking business. And even though Hezbollah still gets money from Iran, they also get money from this remittances and this narco trafficking money. And Iran is actually satisfied that there is a diversity of the revenue stream. And I'm sure that applies to the financing for the Houthis, but more importantly for the material support. This is where I agree, and it's important to have a continuum view. It's like not a snapshot. Now the Houthis are moving here, and now the Iranians are stopping the material aid. Since at least 2014, for every one of these jurisdictions, the Iranians are wanting to move towards self-sufficiency in terms, and you see that in spades now with Hamas, with the local rocket production, because they are tired of what Alex just said, which is the interceptions. Because for a relatively deniable strategy, they want to make sure that interdictions or interceptions that, like you see with CENTCOM doing with the Iranian continued material support, can happen less and less often. And that's why you see these, local hallmarks, imitations of Iranian missiles coming out of Yemen, much like you see local riffs off of what has been going on.
I don't know what happened there.
I think we lost him, but I just wanted
Yeah.
to add that I totally agree until he gets back. And I think, yes, you're back, Benham.
Benham, we just lost you for 10 seconds.
Sorry about that. Long story short, they want local production, which diminishes the chances of interdiction. And so as a more self-sufficient element of the axis of resistance is in the medium to long term, in terms of the material capability, not political. In terms of the material capability, I would argue that Iran's revolutionary leaders see this as a welcome development. So long as they are in conflict zones. No place where there is an axis of resistance member is a political success. And because of the lack of that political success, Iran is content with the mediocre funding, the local weapons production, because of the homogenizing and flattening impact of that conflict that will bind, no matter the differences, the hub and the spoke, the patron and the proxy.
I had a different question for you, Benham, but just because of what you just said, let me ask you this. Look, it sounds to me like you're saying, which I think a lot of Iran watchers agree, that Iran's grand strategy, if there is one, is to be a spoiler across the board. I mean, Faria says, even the Houthis consider Hezbollah to be a bit on the cautious side of things, which is really what I'm going to ask you. Having a grand strategy to be a spoiler in power so they can, disturb the peace, if you will. I wonder if that in the long term is something the Islamic Republic can afford to pursue, the track that it can be on. Because look, unlike the Houthis maybe in Yemen, with few targets that the West can go after, Iran has a prized nuclear program, lots of different military installations, lots of infrastructure that can become targets for Western retaliation. So this idea that Iran can stay the course and be a spoiler and not be afraid of the consequences, as I pointed out to Shakriya, I'm not sure if the Iranians can be that reckless. They have so much to lose. And would that not be a reason for them to, if they can restrain the Houthis, at least create some distance from some of the actions that the Houthis are taking right now?
I'm not sure, because then we'd have to take all of their comments of the Iranians about, the distance that they say already exists between them and the Shia militias in Iraq, and them and the Assad regime, and Hezbollah. Listen, the more these actors fight in local conflicts that still have an Iranian interest, and then the more they cross over and get out of an extraterritorial conflict. So Hezbollah fighting in Syria, starting with Qusair in 2013, or the Houthis first trying to fire missiles at Israel, failing, and then doing this A2AD campaign, which is really, in one sense, if you look at it, a replica of Iran's A2AD in the Persian Gulf and Strait of Hormuz. They hope the conflict, actually, in my view, continues. None of these, in my view, yet are Vietnams for Iran. And the longer they do not become Vietnams for Iran, the more, I think, in my view, of the way the regime is seeing this, they see these as chances to gamble. So rather than seeing as the nuclear capability and the nuclear program at home being something that the West could hold dear, they see this as two sides of the same coin. The nuclear program, the homeland missiles, the surface-to-air missiles, the surface-to-surface missiles of the Islamic Republic of Iran in territory functions as the deterrent. And the support for terrorism and the material support for the Houthis and Hamas and Lebanese Hezbollah and the Assad regime and the Shia militias is what allows Iran to continue the asymmetric conflict, to have ideological victory, to have political victory, to have military victory. So in one sense, the more secure the regime feels and the less it's been contested, and the proof is in the pudding, Israel has not overtly struck Iran's nuclear program ever. America has not overtly struck Iran's nuclear program ever. America still, after 172 attacks across 3 jurisdictions in the past 3.5 months, have yet to even officially commence an IRGC targeting campaign outside Iran, let alone inside Iran. So I would say guys in Iran who are more content to run risks than ever before, they would say it's working.
Right. Shakir, that's a great segue to what I wanted to ask you. Please comment on what Behnam said. I tend to think you guys agree on this, but I want to hear you tell me why Behnam is right or wrong. But I mean, overall, what I want to ask you is, as somebody who spent so much time looking at Iran's axis of resistance, I mean, you were covering the proxy groups in Iraq, 15 years ago. You've seen some of these groups. I was about to say lived with them, but I know you've certainly interviewed and how they operate. So just tell me, where is the axis of resistance today, some 4 years after the assassination of Qasem Soleimani? Does Ismail Qani and the rest of the Quds First commanders, do they really have that kind of an ideological zeal?
Alex, you just remind me one of my worst night. I was driving from Erbil to Duhok. I just I take a wrong way to the Mosul. So there is a really tricky way. If you go to the Mosul, you go just directly to the heart of the ISIS, which is I did. Thanks for the Peshmerga forces. They just stopped in the middle of the way driving to ISIS camp in Mosul. It was the worst time I had there in Kurdistan of Iraq and in Iraq in the Mosul part. But for your question, and I have a comment about my colleagues about the Iran support, the economy support. When you look at how Iran support this proxy group, Iran have a 3 pillar to supporting them. The military, that's how you look at the patron and proxies relations. Not all these groups is fighting because of Iran. They have their own gain, their own interest to have Iran support. So these 3 pillars is a military one. The Behnam in the beginning explained how they deliver the missiles, drones. Now we are facing the modern proxy groups who has drones with the missiles that have a long range. So you see how for the military they need Iran. The same strategy when during the Soviet, actually in the Cold War, they used it in the Third World. For instance, you can see the Egypt relations with the Soviet. And the second one, ideology, not a religious one. There is a difference between the Shia, our colleagues explain it, how, for instance, you have Alawis in the Syria, you have a Shia as in Iraq even, you have a different Shia who are seeing Khamenei as the supreme leader of Iran, as the source of the Shia religions. Then you have a competition between the Khamenei and the Sistani in Iraq, like the competition between Najaf and Qom about the Shia religious sect. So about the religious is not the important point here. When we're talking ideology, we're talking about how these all axis of resistance, came together against the US and Israel. So that's how the ideology worked to bring them together and to coordinate together. Then you come into the political point is important for the Houthis, actually. In the political pillar, how Iran will help this group to came to the power and keep the power permanently. The way Iran helped Hezbollah in Lebanon to control power, to become state within a state. The same strategy Iran played in Iraq, helping Hashashabi's groups, and now the Malikis lead coalition in Iraq. Now they're in the power. They are a government of the Shia Sudani Iran-backed government in Iraq. So now they have a political power, security power, and military power. So with these all 3 pillars, Iran trying to control this proxy and helping them for achieving their power in these countries. That's how you can explain this Iran and the proxy group relation. If any chance happen and they lose one of these pillars, that's how it's easy for this proxy to find another patron, another source for their goal. So I think it's important to mention this point when you look at how the IRGC and Iran's working with these proxy groups. I hope I answer your question.
Very good. Thank you. That was wonderful. We have about 14 minutes. I know Behnam has a hard stop, so I'll try and sort of keep us to time. Faria, let me ask you this question, and I'm starting to look at some of the questions that are coming in. The issue of Gaza, you haven't commented on it, but would the ceasefire in Gaza be sufficient to get the Houthis to stop their attacks in the Red Sea? And I guess a related question to that is this sort of overall factor of the Houthi relationship with Iran, with the axis of resistance, what that does to the future of a united Yemen. The questioner is asking whether this issue is going to perhaps make the reality of a secession or split in Yemen and the creation of a South Yemen more of a reality. Would you agree with that or not? And the Gaza one.
Let's start with the Gaza one. Will the Houthis stop attacks in the Red Sea if some sort of a ceasefire happens in Gaza? I think yes. Most of people will tell you no. But again, I genuinely think they don't understand how the Houthi thinks. And most importantly, they don't understand how the Houthi miss things. But that is their plan. And I think for now, they do feel they are in an R&R. Like any humanitarian worker, they have done and they got the best out of it. So any deal for them actually will work. And I do think that they actually, in their own worldview, for their own reasons, they actually believe they're helping Gaza. And they believe this is their duty. And I think dismissing that is not useful to understand any group, let alone them. So the first question, yes. And I say that with a very good level of confidence, knowing also and aware that how many people disagree with that. But I do think they don't get the Houthis. Number two, again, I think they believe in that, not because they are the most human people in the world who look into things solidarity, but for their own reasons. They do think they're helping Gaza. Will current situation overall a change if let's say, and this is the worry some people have legitly, is that they will use the same card in the future to say, oh, if something happens to Lebanon, if someone burns the Quran somewhere, that is a legit concern. And that is, I think, something we must be recognizing in that regard in the long term. But I do think that, yes, they will stop if something happens in Gaza.
Now go over back to Behnam. Behnam, I know you wrote just under a year ago, maybe about a year ago, your big monograph on Iran's ballistic missile production. So on. We talked quite a bit about missiles, but instructors that might have come with these packages. I want you to take us, I don't know if you came across this or studied this, but the relationship between the Houthis and the Hezbollah, if you put Iran aside. I mean, this idea of Hezbollah as the main handler of Iranian affairs in the Arab world, that the Iranians as non-Arabs are just not able to do as well as the Lebanese as Arabs, the Hezbollah folks that can go to the region. Did you see much of there is a connection clearly, but how much did you see in terms of the role of Hezbollah in terms of weapons transfers, technology assistance, and so forth?
In terms of weapons transfers and the hard stuff, the material stuff, the things that fly and go boom, I would say the empirically verifiable right now using open source alone is limited. But looking at Arab media in particular, Arab world media from the Arab world and social media for a long time has been talking about the Hezbollah presence in Houthi-occupied territory in Yemen. And that too is not necessarily an aberration. It could be in collaboration with an Iranian element. In some of these places, it's the IRGC Quds Force, allegedly Unit 340. That is the surface-to-surface, missile unit that is helping with indigenizing the production. The touch point could be the Islamic Republic of Iran, IRGC Quds Force, Unit 340, Lebanese Hezbollah, Houthis. It could be a continuum of folks talking, listening, learning, a diffusion of a capability, a building up of an indigenous capability. And the fact that if you overlay what Hezbollah has done in the past, which is to help train Iraqi militias in Iran, to help be in Iraq, to help literally fight alongside the Assad regime, interoperability with the state as well as with the IRGC in Syria, Then you layer on the reports of Yemen. Iran has the makings of a beginning of a cocktail of how to do this kind of proxy outreach. So just because we don't have the best evidence, we have better stuff that even Treasury has sanctioned about the IRGC and in particular the Quds Force doing this material support in Yemen, doesn't mean that in the future, or particularly in a peacetime or a post-conflict scenario, more about Hezbollah's role may not come to light.
All right, great. Shukri, you can react to that, or I have a question for you, but go for it.
Yeah, I want to talk about the Hezbollah. For the Hezbollah's role being shifted after the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020, because Iran couldn't find another commander like Qasem Soleimani, knowing Arabic language, the culture, being engaged with the militia group. So it's really difficult for Iran to have this coordinating among these Shia militia groups. So what's happening now, we see the increasing of the Hezbollah's power among these militia groups. And for Hezbollah, we know Hezbollah got the best opportunity in Syrian civil war to be trained by Russia. Now, in the case of the way Hezbollah now have a more better skill for the gathering intelligence, the military skills is increasing. Now we see Hezbollah the way they're helping Houthis with the help of the Quds. So Hezbollah, Arab Shia militia group for the Iran has a better link and better connection with the other Arab Shia militia group than the Persian Shia Quds. That's the reason you will see the Hezbollah's power will be increasing. In my opinion, even the future of Iran, if we see any change in Iran, the death of Khamenei or the regime change, any change in Iran, I think Hezbollah would be the leader of these Shia militia groups in the Middle East. That's my opinion about how Hezbollah will see more power about this group.
Great. So we have about 7-8 minutes left. I have one more question for Faria, and then I have one question for all three of you in terms of what U.S. policy options are in terms of pressuring Tehran to distance itself from the Houthis, or actually you could also do the same thing, pressuring the Houthis to distance itself from the Islamic Republic. But my question to you, Faria, is, as an expert on the Houthis, educate us. What are the main factions when it comes to the Houthi movement, this movement of people? We heard about some of the things in the last panel. Some of it sounds pretty messianic, the end of the world sort of scenarios. But what are your thoughts in terms of the main differences that are identifiable and can be detected when you look at the broader Houthi movement?
I think there is a lot have been said about that in the previous panel, so I will try not to repeat that of who the Houthis are. But I do want to emphasize that, in my opinion, the question, first and foremost, I think there are a bunch of things for the US and UK and other countries that they can do in Yemen in exception or instead of bombing Yemen. I think first and foremost, there must be a continued protection of the ships in the Red Sea. This is important. And this is something very different from bombing Yemen. These are two different things. You have more legality, more right, and more logic in one than the other. And I think number two, the US, the UK, whatever they do in Yemen or don't do with the Houthis, it must be in cooperation with regional and international frameworks. The Chinese, the Jordanians, the Egyptians are also as much suffering from this as everyone else. And I think it's very dangerous that the US and the UK continues to act alone and outside international frameworks in the Middle East. And number three, I think there must be a better job in fighting smuggling and financial networks. That doesn't need designation, that doesn't need bombing, that needs a little bit of a better friends and a little bit of coordination in the Middle East. And I think that's very clear for everyone in every possible way. And finally, there must be a continuous of a way, so believe it or not, by now the ones who actually have a little bit of leverage over the Houthis are actually the Saudis. Big part of why the Houthis are being maximalist is because they believe they have a deal with the Saudis, so they can push it to the limit with the US, with the UK, with everyone else. So somehow, yes, this is the unfortunate or the unbelievable end of 10 years of a war. But yes, yesterday's enemy is today the person who have the #1 leverage over the Houthis. It's not the Iranians, actually. It's in fact the Saudis. And I cannot emphasize that enough. And finally, I do understand and constantly, for a lot of reasons, the Western obsession in looking into whether this matters from an Iran or not from an Iran. How much Iran told the Houthis or didn't tell them, how much it can or doesn't. You really have to get over this. This is old news. This is an old question. This is a DC, London-centric question that has no reality anymore of what you should be thinking of outside. It doesn't matter today whether the Houthis talk to Iran or doesn't. It doesn't make them any less of a horrible group or any better of a group. And vice versa. I think you have a very old playbook that is so much even before the end of civilization, you know, before the whatever of 1990, and you're going back into it to understand a very fluid, very dynamic, very different Middle East. And I would, again, cautiously advise to move away from that, whether in looking to the Houthis or looking to Israel's security or looking to allies or looking to OPEC or looking to everything. I think DC must have changed the driving seat into a different.
You might have to repeat some of that in a minute, because I'm going to ask everybody to give us your 30 seconds final thoughts. If you could talk about anything you have left on your mind to share with us. But really, I wanted to ask you, what are the options in terms of the West? I mean, Faria has obviously just told us, but maybe he can continue along the same lines. But Behnam, let me start with you, Shukri, and Faria gets the last word. Go ahead, please, Behnam.
Sure. I certainly think there's no good option so long as you're in the world of problem management, not problem solving. The problem is, I think, with respect, if we wholeheartedly adopt Faria's approach, the U.S. would be in the business of going well beyond the Marshall Plan in every jurisdiction that Iran has a proxy or a partner, or where there is a ruined local economy and a failure of a state, and it's a jurisdiction of weak central authority, which, if you look at the trend line of U.S. presidential elections, there is going to be less, not more involvement. And based on that, grim reality, Obama, Trump, Biden, and whoever else is next have been talking about leaving the region. So that does limit the political appetite to take risks here. On top of that, however, is knowing how these money flows, weapons flows work. There is a supply side problem and there is a demand problem. There is a local capability the Houthis have, and you want to really degrade that capability, as Biden and Blinken and the Secretary of Defense, Austin, are talking about. There is some good news there. The targeting of not warehouses, but of missiles being put onto launchers tells you that there is new ISR, that there are more eyes and ears on Yemen than before. So rather than have to worry about finding every single missile and where it's cut up and all the depots, if you cripple the launch capabilities, that is good news by me. On top of that, of course, there is this alleged Iranian spy ship operating somewhere between the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb, and the Gulf of Aden. That ship should not be there, if you catch my drift. There is no reason why Iran is permitted to use the Houthis to impede freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, but the Iranians are able to have a cargo alleged IRGC spy ship there aiding the Houthis in targeting. So these are some easy, low-hanging fruit to begin to change the equation, militarily at least.
Thank you, Behnam. Shukriya, let's see if you can do 30 seconds as well.
I will try my best. Military solution is not going to work. I disagree with Behnam, because we're talking about the U.S. attacking proxy groups with the missile and drones, and one Houthi drones with the one of the ship can destroy everything in Red Sea. So it's not easy to defeat this group. I have another solution. I think the main point is to localize these proxy groups. How you can localize this proxy group? By solving Israel-Palestinian problem. By solving this problem, what would happen? So this axis of resistance will be destroyed, because the main point for them standing against Israel, supporting Palestine cause. When you solve this problem, now they will face with the local problem. Like the Houthi, we know before this, the Hamas, the Gaza war, what happened among the Yemenis, they stand against Houthis and able to provide them the life that they deserve to have. That's the reason, even in Iraq. So Hashashabi, they lost popularity. So now they're trying to push for the Palestinian case, Israel and American. So that's how you solve this proxy and the axis of resistance. With the fighting with the military is not solution for the America to defeat them. I try my best in the 30 seconds.
Good. Let's see if we can get Faria in, and maybe he can also give it a go. 30 seconds or so.
Totally agree with Shukriya. I have nothing else to add. If you wanted escalation in the Middle East, think about starting.
If I knew you agree with me, I would take more time off you.
No, but think about Gaza. We
Well,
continue to repeat that so people think it's okay, it's the repeated line, but it is really the beginning. And we cannot underestimate that enough for so many reasons. It's not going to solve everyone's problems, but there is a door there. I think it's very hard to talk about any else in the region so far, especially with these monsters, without the escalation there. It's important to do so.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Shukriya. Thank you, Behnam. I had written some what I thought were pretty smart final thoughts, but there's no time for me to get to them. So I just want to thank you all three for this panel. This is wonderful. I learned so much. I learned so much from the previous panel that was chaired by my good colleague, Jerry Firestein, Ambassador Firestein. And also thanks very much to Ambassador Linder King for taking the time to speak to us for this half-day conference hosted by the Middle East Institute. So much still out there that we can debate. I'm sure we'll have more events on the Houthis, on Yemen, Iran, and the region. That's what we do at the Middle East Institute. With that, again, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.